Ladies and gentlemen, UFC 264 is here. Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor 3. Hugely anticipated bout, ready to take off. Always get these nice little fights after a big hiatus from the UFC. We'll touch on the previous card headlined by Volkov and Gunn. I mean, we won't get into too many details given the time frame, but 7-7 overall. A couple of those picks, I mean, in my gut, I was just so upset because I really felt like I went against everything I believed in. The Tim Means one really stands out, but even the Warlley Alves fight, I've watched Warlley Alves fight for so long, and I really feel like I understand his game plan. And looking at tape on Jeremiah Wells, I was like, this guy could really have a good showing here if he comes in shape and ready to go. And my word, he did not slow down that entire fight. That is 100% a fighter to keep an eye on. But the big news coming out of there for us, Kennedy and Chukwu, I mean, keeping that 4-0 Super Saiyan pick streak alive. I mean, if you're cashing in big on those, happy to be there with you. I mean, the one thing I do feel bad about, one of my favorite fighters on that card, Ike Villanueva, I mean, I thought he was looking pretty good, always in that good box range, but that body kick from Marcin just completely ended him. I think Marcin's kicks are heavily feared in the UFC, and I think that was a good fight for him to be able to kind of show things off a bit. But outside of that, big news with Justin James putting his fight purse on the line, and Charlie Rosa coming in and ruining the party. But as a fighter, what else are you going to do if you're not willing to do that? I mean, you're probably in the wrong sport. But I mean, outside of that, great fights leading into what is now considered, an undisputed, interim title fight between Gane and Derek Lewis, which is hella shocking. But that's an interesting UFC move as usual, right? They got to keep the dollars coming in and the fighters active. But speaking of which, we're going to have a huge card with UFC 264. Couple of fights I felt bad that we missed out on. Sean O'Malley getting that, better competition, and Louis Smolka would have been great. But unfortunately, he has a staph infection and won't be able to get that done. But the big one that we lost that everyone's kind of crying about is the Sean Brady and Kevin Lee fight. That would have been a potential fight of the night and easily would have wrapped up what could be the best main card the UFC's put together this year. I think that would have been a huge one to kind of set up the division at 170 moving forward. But, we're going to see Sean Brady a lot moving forward, and I'm looking forward to that. What's really interesting about this card is that we're going to keep talking about how amazing some of the fights are, but, we're kicking it off with something very simple, if you will, combined 0-4 record between Alen Amedovski and Yaozong. But it's kind of interesting, the storylines that come with these guys. I mean, the one thing with Yaozong is even after going 0-2 in the UFC, he fails a USADA drug test, gets pinched for 10 months, and now is making a comeback at middleweight, where he was originally a light heavyweight fighter. We go back to that Rashad Coulter fight, you kind of see the good and bad in his game, right? He seems comfortable throwing kicks. Durability is 100% there, but wow, the amount of damage he took in the first round, I mean, that pretty much set him up for what was a grueling fight for the next 2 rounds. But again, the durability played into a factor that Rashad Coulter didn't make weight for the fight. Looked like he was kind of fading as the fight progressed, despite keeping some of that power even late. And I felt like Yaozong really had a good end to the fight, especially in that 3rd round. So the durability, the kicks, the ability to take damage there just really played into what was a little bit less of a lopsided fight. And then you look at a guy like Amedovski, who's 0-2 record as well, kind of comes against 2 bigger names, if you will. I mean, John Phillips is a big name, but is still a 1-5 UFC fighter and pretty much knocked him clean out within the first 30 seconds, I believe. And that would have been his most recent fight after losing to Jotko in what was kind of a very tactical fight. I think that it was obvious that Jutko had a significant advantage on the ground, was able to take him down with ease. And if you look at that fight, I mean, the guy wasn't even able to land more than 10 strikes overall. And that was, primarily ground fight in terms of control time for Jutko. So just a lot of dominance from the other end when you're looking at Amedovski's previous fight. So those are the things that you want to keep your eye on. But you have to look at what happened prior to the UFC, right? This is just a different ball game. So he actually had 2 fights in Bellator before really making that jump. And going into his Bellator fights, he was 6-0 with 4 KOs. And I mean, he went into Bellator, became a 2-0 Bellator fighter with 2 KOs there. So he was riding a huge wave going into his UFC career. But again, this is a different beast. Now, I think that he learned the hard way that there's a lot more tactical aspects to the game, and going in there and swinging wildly with a guy like John Phillips, who just packs a mean punch, especially within the first 3 minutes of a fight, was very surprising to see that in terms of game plan. So for me, when you're looking at this fight. Again, keys to victory. Stay patient. Let's see what Yaozong throws at you, because we know that he can take damage pretty well, but he also gets cut pretty easily. He slows down pretty easily. Attack the body. Get into that boxing range and do some real damage, because I feel like with not seeing his hands up all the time, with the amount of damage that Coulter was able to do, that's where Amedovski really wants to keep the fight, because the one thing that is really going to be working against him is Yaozong's coming in as a previous light heavyweight, should have some serious size advantage, strength advantage, all that fun stuff. And, you know, it was even said that Amedovski might be too small for a middleweight. So little things like that you want to keep in mind when you're talking about this fight. And for Yaozong, I mean, I really think that keeping the kicks going, maintain that distance to avoid a lot of the damage up top, and then slowly work the fight to the ground. I think if he's able to secure even a couple takedowns each round, that's probably going to get him the control time to win this fight if he can't finish. And I think from a tactical perspective, we've seen holes in Amedovski's game, and that's where I think that you're going to have Yaozong, if he's a smarter fighter and maybe even doing some tape review. I think that this is the fight where he can exploit that quite a bit. For me, it's just, you know, going from Tiger Muay Thai to Jackson Wink now, even with such a small record and sample size in MMA, I think that he's doing all the right things in terms of trying to make it back from what was a massive USADA suspension. Like I said, man, just be smarter. I think the cardio will hold up, the durability will hold up later in the fight, where he seems to actually kind of carry it over very well. And with Amedovski, I think that it's kind of the opposite, right? Start quick, get into that boxing range, be ready to throw big blows to slow him down, because if you can get a guy who's fairly slower and not really, you know, able to get finished, at least you can grind out that 3-round victory and avoid any big takedowns that might, you know, keep you on your back for an extended period of time. So without further ado, let's take a look at what these lines look like. First line of the event, I mean, I'm going to lean with Amedovski being a slight favorite here. And the only reason is I think this fight could be a pick'em. But at the same time, I'm actually leaning a little bit more in terms of my personal pick to Yaozong, only because I think that he has the ability to kind of change the fight up wherever it might go. I think that with Amedovski, unless he's been really working at some of these things, the size disadvantage is something you can't really work on. But then you have the aspect of where the fight goes. And to be quite honest, I mean, he got into a slugfest with John Phillips and just that didn't go well. And then in terms of a tactical fight with Jotko, that didn't go well. And so with Yaozong fighting the guys that he did, especially in that Rashad Coulter fight, he's felt power and I think he can deal. And the big thing about it is now can he actually muster up enough, you know, courage to get that fight to the ground, or even land some of his bigger combos that he had success with later in that fight. So let's take a look. I really think it's a pick'em, but I mean, slight edge to Amedovski maybe in terms of just overall notoriety and what he's been doing in the past, given the record differences. But let's take a quick look. We've got opening lines of Yaozong as a plus 159 dog, and he's basically moving up to a pick'em range. I mean, the plus 110 is where we see him. Amedovski opened as a minus 181, which I find a little crazy. I mean, I understand the experience factor here, but you know, there's a huge thing to really consider in terms of fight tape. So I think it's a bit more of a comfortable line now between that minus 135, minus 140 for Alen, and then, you know, plus 115, plus 110 for Yaozong. So, I mean, that might be a dog or pass, only, you know, depending on what we see at the weigh-ins, things like that. This size difference, I think, you know, from just like the strength and physical aspect of it could be a huge issue. And that's going to be interesting to watch come the later parts of that fight.